Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing great. Today we will be talking about Zoho, how the roles, profiles, and security settings works in Zoho, and what are the best practices in terms of when you define a role or a profile or a security compliance settings within your organization. Along with that, we will cover the HIPAA compliance and GDPR compliance as well, how those compliances can be activated within Zoho, and what are the controls that you have when it comes to information flowing in or out of the system. So, just a basic how this process would go on. First of all, we will go through a presentation that will give you a brief introduction of what we will be covering, and after the presentation, we will go in hands-on, see exactly where those options are within the system, and once we are done with it, after that, we will close the today's video. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to share a presentation with you that represents who we are basically. So this is we as a consultant manage a leading ERP and CRM solution company that help businesses implement ERP and CRM within their organization. A bit of introduction about myself. I am a Zoho Creator Certified Developer. I'm also a Zoho CRM Certified Administrator. I have 5+ years experience and I've worked on 50 plus projects. The specific solutions that I worked with or I have expertise along with my team are Zoho One, Zoho Recruit, Zoho People, Creator, and building custom dilute script. It could be a schedule script or it could be function scripts. And then we have also worked on the custom widget backing of Node.js. So the today's topic is setting up profiles and field level security in Zoho. And when it comes to field level security or profile security, one of the biggest concerns of the organization is that if, for example, if you are a healthcare organization and specifically if you are in US zone, US area, like a North zone, North America zone, then you have some compliances that you have to take care of. Uh, which are very very important of whichever system you implement, because your customers medical record or medical history is very important and it can't be openly be available in the system for any other person to hack or penetrate into your system. So you can't really afford it, or none of the organization can really afford this. So Zoho has really lived up on this part, and they have built up a very strong rule in terms of profiles and roles. As in other ERPs and CRMs, you do have profiles and roles, and similarly, you have profiles and roles in Zoho as well. And when we talk about profile and role, there are key things that we need to take care of when we are defining the profile and roles. We should have four to five main questions, and the understanding of this is very important. So if you're new to the CRM, Zoho CRM, or any other CRM or ERP, you must know what is a profile, you must know what is a role, you must know what is a module. Module is an object if in terms of, if we talk about in terms of Salesforce or HubSpot, but in Zoho it's module, and then we know what are the fields within those modules and what are the permission sets. So then we will be discussing like there are some best practices that we need to be very careful about, because defining roles and profiles without understanding could be the possibility is like opening your data to anyone within your organization who is not a standardized person to view that data. It could be financial, it could be health, it could be anything. So the best practice is that first of all, when you define a role, you should be very clear about your hierarchical structure within your organization, because the system really works in a way that the way you define the hierarchy within the system, the roles automatically get assigned to those people. Whenever you create them and you define them a role, they get automatically assigned or fit into the hierarchy which the role is for. And in that way, the data flow across the system in that manner. So anyone above me can see my data, but I can't see the data of anyone above my position. So which is very important, because when you are defining hierarchies, it's very important that you know what your exact organizational hierarchy is, because there are different businesses. There are like thousands of type of businesses, and every business is unique and different. So it's very important that you know your hierarchy, and based on that, you define your roles. Then we have departments and type of permissions. And when so this part is very important in terms of when you are defining profiles. So when you define or decide to define a profile, it's very important you first understand how many group or different type of people from the security point of view within your organizations. So once you know which people or type of bird people are different or need a special access to your system or a controlled access to your system, you just make a list of those all those individuals or all those group of individuals and create profiles based on that. And then the third point is create a separate module for every department or process. The reason for this is that it's instead of having all the data into one module, it's very, very important that you create different module for a different process. That could be like a compliance team should have their own module, sales team should have their own module, to view even to the view and make an action on our data, because if you give access to everyone from a single module, there is a large, like there is a big possibility that your data might get distorted or might get like not as efficient as it should be. So it's highly recommended that you create a separate module for every process. Then when you create a field within a module, it's very important that you understand what that field is and what could be the possible future possibilities within that field. Let me give you an example. So let's say you have a text field that you created, which is single line, but in the future, the character limit for single line is limited, and you have a different requirement that is basically moving that single line to a multi-line field, because the character limit is not allowing you to stay more data into that field, which is a very, very common problem with specifically with people who are new to the ERPs or CRMs, or the people who really was trying to do it themselves, or they are not the subject matter expert or tool matter expert, so they try to implement the tool by themselves, and when they do it, they create these fields that create issue in the longer term. So be very careful what you are doing, which field types you are using. Just make sure that in future you don't have to really worry about them. And having said that, it's very important that when you define a field, the data type is very important, because if you are planning to integrate this module, let's say custom module, to an external system, it's very important that you might be able to move data from CRM to your third party integrator system. But when you're moving the data back, the data needs to be in a structure that the CRM accepts. So it's very important that you structure or you define your fields in a way that it can easily be moved across the systems. And you need a planning for it. And then defining permission sets for special cases, not for each case. So permission sets are basically giving an extra access to already existing permission or profile. So it's highly recommended that you don't use permission set just because it's easy to do it. You only use it when you really need it. Don't use it if you don't need it. Simple as that. So if you really think that someone of specific profile or a specific role needs that access to a specific data, just do it in a specific case. Otherwise, try to move things around with profiles and roles. And very rarely try to be as minimal with the permission sets. Wherever you have a necessity or you can't move on with it, that's the point where you should be using permission sets, but I recommended that you don't use it in every case. Then we have additional security topics that we will give a bit of introduction to, is the GDPR compliance and HIPAA compliance and API limitations. So when we talk about security, based on which region you are, which area you are, it's very important that you understand the security limitations from the government, from the local bodies, and from the your county or your region or whatever it is, have specific security compliance or data compliance that you have to comply with. So at the moment, Zoho does offer GDPR compliance and HIPAA compliance. Shortly, we will go into the system and I will show you how to access those compliance and how to activate them. And then we have API limitations. So don't allow every when you define a profile, you have the access to allow someone to access the APIs. And one thing I would like to highlight here is that a lot of customers come to us who, like, they already got the system implemented by someone 2 years or 1 year back, and they got like confusions with the implementer. They stopped using them, and they later on implementer like undo the changes they have already done in the system. So because they had the access to the API, they were able to make the changes without even accessing the system. So it's very important that whenever you onboard someone or whenever you try to hire a consultant like us, even for us, do sign an NDA, do make sure that you understand what are the API limitations within the system and what are the access levels you are giving to that individual, and how would you handle the situation where they might not be working with you in the future. So make sure that you always document these things because this is very important. Otherwise, you will end up being in a situation where you have no knowledge of what has just happened to your system or what was done to your system. Okay. So now, before we end, let's go into the system itself, and I would like to show you how Zoho system looks like and how it really can play an important part in your transformation. So first of all, as usual, as always, the first thing you do is go to the settings module. So when you go to the settings module, everything that you have access to or based on your environment, you will always find it here. Let's say I can't really see and find a profile rule because profile comes under security control. This is, I know that's why I'm telling you, but let's say you are first time getting into the system, or you are a user but you are not like a regular user and you are just coming into this system just to understand how the roles and profiles are defined. So first thing you will do is basically, if you, let's say we start from the roles, we will say roles, okay, and it goes under the security control. So if I click on the roles, it will take me to the security control panel. Okay, and over here I can define the roles based on different hierarchies, like whatever the hierarchy is, I can define a new role and I can give it to who it should be reporting to. I can choose it should be reporting to manager, what is the description, and share the data with peers. This is very important. If you really want to allow this person to share the data with others, this is very important. Then we have the profiles. In the security control, we have profiles. The similar way that we define the roles, we can define profiles. By default, we always have an administrator and standard profile. So shortly when I go to the modules and forms, I will show you how those profiles can be defined there and how those forms or fields are controlled through profiles. But just to give you a brief background of profiles, you can define new profiles and you can clone a profile. Let's say we name it as a test profile. Okay, and yeah, we create this profile. It is copy of an administrator profile. So once we are done with it, we have access to all this. So now if you go from here, you have the access to each of the module that exist in your system. You can either create, edit, or delete, or you can do anything that you want to do with the module specifically for this permission set of this profile. Then if we move down and if we look around, all the permissions that we see, they are everything that you basically do in the system. So by controlling this profile setting, you basically control the access to the system for that particular user. So as we said in our presentation earlier, we highlighted the best practices that you first of all just highlight the group of people of with who needs a different access level in the system. It could be, some could be the sales people, some could be fulfillment people, some could be logistic managers. So once you have all that information with you, then define profiles for those users. And don't get confused with roles and profiles because profiles are based on the exact level, like exact data level security of the information. Roles are basically the hierarchical information within the organization. So if anyone above me, if they have a profile and a role, they would have access to my data. If they don't have a access to, they are assigned to a profile that they don't have access to in terms of data, even though they have the role, they would be like they won't have the access to the information that they really need. So it's very important that you understand the concept of role and you understand the concept of profile, and you give users the access to the system in a way that basically allow them to move across the information or move across the system efficiently and don't like not waste their time in doing something they can't do. So it's very important when you define something like this, you define it very carefully, planned sort of thing. Then you have roles, as we discussed in roles, and then we have data sharing settings. So data sharing settings is basically defining the specific rules, as we discussed over here in terms of the sharing rules, that you don't do it in every case, but if there is a specific case that you want to use, you just define a new sharing rule and you give them a special access to it. Okay, in that way, the data is shared across the systems or across the profiles and roles. So now coming to the users back. In the users, you can define new users, and in the roles, basically, in the groups, you can define groups. And when you define a user, so when we define a user in the system, we provide or we choose a role and we choose a profile as well. Okay. So this is available for role and profile. So whenever we add a user in the system, we have to choose a role and a profile. So which is very important. That's why whenever you add a new user, you can define a profile and rule. And the other important thing that I would like to highlight here is that when we look at the groups, so let's say there are a group of people who need a special access to, you create a group and then you come to the security control and then you go back to data sharing settings and you can define a sharing rule for that particular group, which is again very important. Now, this was it in terms of the users, data, like profiles and stuff like that. We will come to the compliance setting shortly, but before that, I would like to highlight how basically the profiles are being controlled in the system. So let's go to the modules and fields. And when we go to the modules and fields, we have all these modules. Let's take one of the module, which is the leads module, and we have the layout rules. This is a different topic, but let's go to the fields first. So when we go to the fields, we have fields permissions, but first go to the layout and we have layout permissions as well. So if we go to the module permission on a specific module, and if we go to the module permissions, we can choose who is allowed to see this module. If I remove this, then only the administrator would be able to see this layout in the system. So when administrator try to create a record, he would be able to access this layout. Okay, and if there is one layout, that means only the administrator would be able to access the leads module. No one else would be able to do it. And if you see, we haven't choose the role here, we choose the profile, so which we basically defined previously. So it's very important that you understand that profiles are very, very important when it comes to sharing information between the users and a group of users. So now we come to the fields, and similarly, fields have field permissions. So over here you can see, like, okay, if an administrator have access to read and write to all the fields, but if I choose a test profile, okay, but if I want to change it, I can change it. Okay, so like I change it to a specific people. Okay, and over here, and I'll save it, right? So once I do it, what happened is basically, uh, what happened here is basically these fields won't be available to test profile anymore. When the test profile try to access the module of leads, he won't be able to see these profiles. Reason, we have changed the permission sets for those fields in the system for those users, right? And similarly, we can do it for standard or administrator profiles and control the fields. And in the similar fashion, we can do all the modules and we can control the security of the fields for each of these modules. Okay, so that's basically the main purpose of profiles and roles, and how they mainly control the system in terms of access level. And if we go back to the profile, this was leads, how the profiles playing with leads. But if we go to the user control and security control, and we go to any of the profile settings, we can even control the API access through it. Like, should the user have the access to the API? Should the user be able to access developer permissions? Should he will do approve anything or manage forms like web to system forms, lead generation forms, assignment rules, emails, permissions, like everything that you can think of a system of doing in the system, you can control that through a profile. Okay. So this was it in terms of the importance of profiles, importance of roles, how you can access different types of roles and profiles within the system, where you will find profiles, how you define a new profile, how you define a new role. So all this information is available within Zoho CRM settings, and you can access that and you can define or customize your security settings as per your need. Now, The last topic of this discussion today is the compliance settings. So in the compliance settings, by default, by out of the box, I would say Zoho has offered GDPR compliance and HIPAA compliance settings. So if you activate our GDPR compliance, so you just need to choose the exactly like the information that according to what you are planning to do with the compliance, you can just fill in the information, which is basically EU GDPR compliance settings. So you just restrict the user or data for how long do you want to keep the information for. Do you want to access the consent? Do you want to take the consent? All that information you basically comply for that in the modules for the leads and contacts, because leads and contacts are the specific modules that basically gets created whenever system input comes out of the system, out from the system. It could be a contact or it could be lead. That's why you can enable a GDPR compliance on these modules. Secondly, you have HIPAA compliance. Anyone who has worked with healthcare knows HIPAA compliance very well. So HIPAA compliance is something that Zoho takes very seriously, and in almost every other tool out there, either Zoho People, Zoho Creator, Zoho Recruit, or any other system that saves or stores external information or could be an access point for an external user, Zoho does offer a HIPAA compliance settings over there. One way or the other, it's not always the same. It's a bit different. The process is a bit different when it comes to Zoho Creator, but we will be covering that in future topics as well. But in terms of Zoho CRM, you just need to go to the settings, user and control, and compliance settings, and then you can access the HIPAA compliance option over here, and you can activate it. And based on your requirement or your settings, you basically can choose what exactly you want to restrict in terms of the information. Okay, so that was it from our end. Hope you liked the video. Hope you understood the concept of role profiles and security, or defining your organizational security settings within the Zoho CRM system. If you have any questions, any queries, please feel free. You can reach me at info@consultantmanage.com, or you can also reach me at my LinkedIn.